Sustrans interviews the candidates for the West Midlands mayoral elections 2021.
Hi, I'm Byrne. I'm the MP for Hodge Hill and Labour's Shadow Mayor for the West Midlands.
My name is Steve Cauldwell. I'm the Leader of the Opposition on Solihull Council, and I am the Green Party's candidate to be the next Mayor of the West Midlands.
Hello there, I'm Andy Street, and I'm the current Mayor of the West Midlands and also the Conservative candidate for the next mayoral term.
Hi, I'm Jenny Wilkinson. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for West Midlands Mayor.
What are your plans to prioritise and create equity in active transport policy and investment across the combined authority? Sustrans believes that cities and towns should be places that prioritise the people who live and spend time there. For too long, they have been designed around cars, leading to congestion and leaving less space for walking, cycling and spending time in. These are things that make our lives better and add to our happiness. Car-dominated spaces create congestion and damage our environment and health. They harm people who are already disadvantaged the most. Our cities and towns can and should be designed with everyone's health and well-being in mind, rather than cars.
So this is something that I feel quite strongly about because I represent a seat in East Birmingham, which is the most income deprived constituency in England, where we have terrible cycling infrastructure. Yet the way that places like East Birmingham were developed means that you have got some strategically located parks, you've got some canal networks, you've got some green belt along, for example, the River Cole. But at the moment, we're not prioritising investment in many of the places that are poorest. And I think COVID has really brought home the error in that kind of thinking. So we've got to radically rethink health policy for the years to come, and we've got to zero in on health inequalities, some of those stubborn long-term health inequalities that mean that here in the West Midlands, we had healthy life expectancy actually falling before COVID, even though it was going up in the rest of the country. Equally, we've got to make sure that a lot of the transport infrastructure is safe. That is a particular issue for women. So, for example, if you take some of the tow paths that we've got where, alongside the canal, good schemes have been put in place and then people have forgot to light them properly. So making sure that we're incorporating women's safety into every transport investment that we make is a really significant thing that we've got to do as well. So looking at some of the areas of health inequality, looking at some of the gender inequalities as well, those are two basic perspectives that we've got to bring to every single decision that we take when it comes to transport.
Okay, and I think this is really the big question, and this goes back to one of my pledges, which is to make a transport system that works for everybody. And I think it's really easy to think about mass transport when we talk about transport systems, but actually transport is how you move from point A to point B, and whether that's by foot or by bicycle or train, plane, bus, whatever. We need to really reimagine how we do that in the West Midlands. And it is a reality that our region is very much dominated by the car. When we look at the motorway network, the strategic road network that we have in the West Midlands, it's very car focused, and we do need to be a bit bold and a bit brave and say, actually, if we're going to achieve some of our goals around the climate emergency, but B, also improve the state of our public health, we need to start prioritizing active transit. So that does mean actually things like looking at the way in which we create roads to provide infrastructure for cycling. And I spoke previously about how that needs to be top quality infrastructure in line with the LTM 120 standards that the government has proposed. And we've seen a bit of that in Birmingham for the Commonwealth Games. That really needs to be the baseline standard that gets rolled out now across the region. But it's also thinking about how we deprioritize car use. How do we allow people to make the right choices aside from using the car to get from point A to point B? And for me, that's thinking about low traffic neighborhoods. That's about reconfiguring the road network. That's about introducing more 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. It's about how we plan and lay out our housing, that we're building over the next 10 to 15 years to make sure that that is from the ground up designed for people to walk and cycle in safely, and also providing things like bike shelters within that planning framework. So we say, whenever there's a development coming forward, yes, this development works, but what about the active transport that it can enable? But again, this is something that I've got a lot of great ideas about. That's going to be in our manifesto that's coming out next week. But at the end of the day, the Green Party believes about doing politics with people and not to them. So it's really important that we get the general public to come with us in anything that we're proposing.
Yeah, it's a very important question, this. And again, I'd encourage people to have a little look at what we've been doing, because we have put cash on the table to encourage community groups, particularly reaching out to groups who might not have access to cycling naturally, for them to have an opportunity. It came through our Better Streets Fund, and we've had a number of programs as a result of that, working with MenCap. And when I actually went to see their cycling activities at MenCap, it really was inspiring to see the way in which that was giving people confidence, actually some of their clients confidence. We've done work with the Wheels Club up at the Aldersley Stadium in Wolverhampton, and we've also done work with groups around Walsall Rugby Club, again bringing community cycling together there. So a whole host of community groups have actually had funding, particularly looking at widening access. And what I'm committed to in the manifesto is we would set up what you'd probably call almost like a citizens panel to challenge us on how our plans are developing. They may even challenge the commissioner, you might say, to actually say, are we making sure that our plans are really reaching into communities rather than just to the natural, easy to adopt cyclists. So that would be a clear commitment, a citizens panel to challenge us on the whole question of how far reaching our plans were. And just to give you a really good example of how we're trying to think about this, the news that we had confirmed last week about Moseley Station being reopened, a lot of debate about the plan for that, the conclusion, no car parking, or no long-term car parking, obviously, but really good cycle facilities there. So people being able to then use the combination of cycling and then jumping on the train. And then, of course, if you have a fold-up bike, easy then to then continue in the city centre if that's where you're commuting to. So we're really trying to think about how we can combine cycling and public transport.
We have to really understand where we are at the moment, I think, and our transport systems across the region are really inadequate. Cars are seen as a necessity for many journeys, which causes obviously problems with air pollution, congestion, but also there's a fact that many of the poorer, more disadvantaged households across the region don't have access to a car. So we have to really look seriously at how we move away from being so reliant and so dependent on cars. And having given up my own car recently, I'm sort of looking at the challenges of how I get about the region and starting to see how difficult that can be. So it's fine for local journeys, but it's more difficult for longer journeys. And we have to really embed a different approach if we're going to move people away from cars. So it's making other forms of transport actually accessible to everybody, and just designing our whole environment and thinking about planning and the sort of 15-minute neighbourhood concept to make it easy for everybody to get to where they need to go to, and to make sure that investment is across the whole region as well and not concentrated just around the big cities, making sure that it's accessible and comprehensive for everybody.